In professional communications work, there's a concept sometimes referred to as a seam. A seam is a boundary, a place where two systems meet, where responsibility becomes unclear. And throughout history, seams have often become vulnerabilities. Imagine a phone call that begins in Pakistan and ends in California. An email sent from Germany to New York. A message routed through servers in multiple countries before arriving at its destination. At what point does that communication become foreign? At what point does it become domestic? Which government has authority over it? Which laws apply? And who is responsible for monitoring it? Before September 11, 2001, these questions were largely treated as legal and technical concerns. After September 11th, they became matters of national security. The attacks exposed intelligence failures that investigators would spend years attempting to understand. Agencies possessed fragments of information. Individual clues existed. Separate investigations touched pieces of the same network, yet the information remained disconnected. In the years that followed, intelligence officials repeatedly returned to a similar conclusion: that the problem was visibility. Information existed, but the government simply could not see enough of it quickly enough. And if visibility was the problem, then greater visibility became the proposed solution. What followed was one of the most significant expansions of surveillance authorities in modern American history. Some of the programs remained secret for years. Some would not become public until whistleblowers exposed them. Others evolved into legal frameworks that still exist today. But they all originated from the same question: how much information must a government collect to ensure it's never surprised again?
You're listening to the Partisan Comms Podcast.
There is a signal broadcast every second of every day through our television sets.
We want to tell you what we know as we know it. We just got a report in that there's been some sort of explosion at the World Trade Center in New York City.
Don Daler, ABC's Don Daler, who is on the scene. Don, just give me some description again of what you can see now.
What we're seeing, it appears that there is more and more fire and smoke enveloping the very top of the building. And as fire crews are descending on this area, it does not appear that there's any kind of an effort up there yet. Now remember, oh my God.
Oh my God.
That looks like a second plane.
Just in, you were looking at
we have a breaking news
very
story to tell you
disturbing
about.
live shot there. That is the World Trade Center, and we have unconfirmed reports this morning. New York plane has crashed.
As we come on now, we have serious news of a major and very tragic plane right now. Incredible plane crash into the
Katie, I don't want to alarm anybody right now, but apparently it felt just a few moments ago like there was an explosion of some kind here at the Pentagon.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. We're looking at a live picture from Washington, and there is smoke pouring out of the Pentagon.
That's 47 stories tall there. You can see it going. So this happened, some 6 hours or so after the collapse of the World Trade Center. Presumably, it was so close to the World Trade Center that it had been weakened by the explosions and the collapse of those buildings.
George, can I just interrupt you for a sec? I'll come right back to you. But Ann Compton, who's been with the president all day, is on the phone from Nebraska. We don't want to lose her if we can have her. Annie, can you hear me?
Yes, Peter, I can.
What are you doing in Nebraska?
Well, we didn't know where we were till we landed. President Bush is here at the home of the Strategic Command. This is the area, this is the base where those big doomsday aircraft are kept. And he has disappeared down the rabbit hole, Peter, down through a red brick small building. He and what skeleton staff are with him down into an underground bunker where Ari Fleischer tells us the president is going to chair a National Security Council meeting by teleconference.
Welcome to episode 26. I'm Terrence. The attacks of September 11th fundamentally altered the operating environment of the American intelligence community. Prior to the attacks, many intelligence systems remained shaped by Cold War assumptions. Resources focused heavily on nation-states, military capabilities, diplomatic activity, and traditional espionage. Terrorist organizations certainly existed as intelligence targets, but they did not occupy the same strategic position they would after 2001. That changed overnight. The scale of the attacks created enormous pressure on political leaders, intelligence agencies, and law enforcement organizations. Congress and the public demanded answers, and intelligence officials faced a question that would shape policy for years. Why had the government failed to connect the dots? Investigations eventually revealed that numerous pieces of information existed before the attacks. Some information sat within intelligence databases, some existed inside criminal investigations, and some remained scattered across agencies that rarely shared information effectively. The conclusion reached by many policymakers was straightforward. The intelligence community needed greater access to communications. More access, faster access, and broader access. It needed the ability to identify threats before they matured into attacks. Within weeks of September 11th, new authorities were being discussed at the highest level of government. Presidential authorizations were drafted, legal memoranda were prepared, and new intelligence activities were approved under extraordinary secrecy. Most Americans would remain unaware of these programs for years. Collectively, they became known as the President Surveillance Program. And at the center of that system was a compartment so sensitive that even many government officials never knew it existed. Its codename was STELLARWIND. The President Surveillance Program emerged during the immediate aftermath of September 11th. And unlike traditional intelligence operations conducted under well-established legal frameworks, this program operated under presidential authorization and extraordinary secrecy. Only a small number of officials possessed full knowledge of its scope. Many members of Congress were unaware it existed, and even within the intelligence community, access remained tightly restricted. Public discussion later focused heavily on one particular component of the program, which was wireless interception of communications involving suspected terrorist connections. This activity eventually became publicly known as the Terrorist Surveillance Program, but focusing exclusively on wiretaps risks missing the larger picture. The President Surveillance Program was not a single capability, it was an architecture, a collection of intelligence activities operating under a common authorization. According to later reporting and government disclosures, portions of the program involved communications interception, metadata collection, and large-scale data analysis intended to identify potential terrorist networks. The objective was clear: find threats before they acted, identify connections before attacks occurred, and reduce uncertainty. And that objective sounds familiar because it appears repeatedly throughout intelligence history. Whether examining Cold War information systems, communications monitoring programs, or modern data collection efforts, intelligence agencies consistently pursue the same strategic goal: visibility. The challenge after September 11th was that terrorists often communicated across borders. An email might originate overseas and terminate inside the United States. A phone call might involve participants located in multiple countries. Digital communications routinely cross jurisdictions. To intelligence planners, those international communications represented potential blind spots. The government feared adversaries were exploiting the seam between foreign intelligence collection and domestic legal protections. The solution became aggressive surveillance. One compartment of the program eventually became known as STELLARWIND, and even today, STELLARWIND occupies a somewhat unusual place in intelligence history. The name has acquired an almost mythological quality because it remained classified for so long, yet at its core, it represented a practical response to a perceived intelligence problem. Officials believed existing authorities moved too slowly. They feared bureaucratic obstacles could prevent timely collection, and they worried that another attack might occur while agencies debated legal procedures.
The National Security Agency's system for collecting data on Americans' phone records may be on the way out. Fox's Jillian Turner tells us why the winds of change are blowing for the STELLARWIND program.
Trump administration sources tell Fox News the NSA has recommended President Trump suspend one of the most controversial spying programs in American history. It's called STELLARWIND. For over a decade, the program has allowed the NSA to gather metadata on Americans' phone calls and text messages, data that's been used by intelligence operatives to help track down terrorists and their networks. But now, sources confirm the NSA thinks STELLARWIND has become too burdensome. An NSA spokesperson says this issue is part of a deliberative intelligence community process, and President Trump will ultimately make a final decision. Congress will have a say as well. The law regulating the program expires in December. That law is Congress's 2015 USA Freedom Act. STELLARWIND is a top-secret program created by the Bush administration after 9/11. It operated below the public radar for 12 years until Edward Snowden leaked its existence. STELLARWIND provoked a national outcry and sparked a debate that pitted American civilians against the intel community.
You know, as an intelligence analyst, I want access to the information. As an American, I want that information to be hard to get to.
President Obama continued the program, reauthorizing a pared-down version in 2015 meant to limit data collection on Americans.
This is not an issue in which we have to choose between security and civil liberties.
Today, the ACLU supports killing the program, but says doing so doesn't go far enough to protect Americans. And sources in the intelligence community say STELLARWIND isn't nearly as useful today as it was 5 years ago. Terrorists now prefer to use encrypted apps and social media.
As terrorists migrate away from traditional intercept vulnerabilities, such as using unsecure phone lines and cell phones, this program becomes less and less important.
After 9/11, they took one of the programs I had done, or the back end part of it, and started to use it to spy on everybody in this country. So that was a program they created called STELLARWIND. That was separate and compartmented from the regular activity that was ongoing because it was doing domestic spying. All the equipment was coming in. I knew something was happening, but then when the contractors I had hired came and told me what they were doing, it was clear where all the hardware was going and what they were using it to do. It was simply a different input. Instead of being foreign, it was domestic input.
Somebody told me that they can listen to what we're saying by my having this, even if it's turned off.
Yes. Here's the real grand design. Every domain, think of a domain as an activity, a specific type of activity, phone calls, or banking is another domain. So if you think of graphing each domain, and then each graph then turning it in the third dimension, the trick now is to map through all the domains in that third dimension, pulling together all the attributes that any individual has in every domain, so that now I can pull your entire life together from all those domains and map it out and show your entire life over time.
One day I got a hit on the dirty word search for a program that I'd never heard of called STELLARWIND. It came back because the little caveat for it. They're called handling caveats, which is like, you can think of like burn after reading or for your eyes only. But this one's called STLW, which means stellar wind. Unless you know what stellar wind is, you don't know how to handle it. All I knew is it wasn't supposed to be on my system. This is a little bit unusual.
I don't understand why you're not afraid.
Why should I be?
Because if what you're saying it was possible, it would be revolutionary and people would have a vested interest in preventing that from happening.
I'm too old to be afraid. I'm too old.
We can't show you the legal authorization for it. You just got to take our word for it. And so they did this, and this became a mass surveillance program called STELLARWIND, which they said was supposed to monitor the phone calls and internet communications, emails, and things like that of everybody in the United States and around the world who they could get access to for links to Al-Qaeda. Because if you remember in the wake of the September 11th attacks, they were saying, we thought there could be sleeper cells of Al-Qaeda that were just, peppered all throughout the country, and they were going to spring up at any moment. Of course, like weapons of mass destruction, it just didn't exist. It was all a power grab. But on that basis, they started doing this in secret, and it was completely unconstitutional. It was completely illegal, even under the very loose requirements of the Patriot Act.
I'm not sure how many of you got a chance to hear Keith Alexander yesterday, the head of the NSA, talk about the NSA's activities. Bill, how do you reconcile, is there some way to reconcile General Alexander's statement that the NSA isn't keeping track of every American with the existence of a facility like the one in Utah?
NSA's charter, and it was a legitimate one, was to do foreign intelligence, and I was with that all the way, and I did the best I could in that job. Unfortunately, they took those programs that I built and turned them on you, and I'm sorry for that. I didn't intend that, but they did that.
What you're describing really is hard to reconcile with the laws as the laws are generally understood by the lawyers who work with them.
Most people are familiar with the Webster's definition of intercept. UCIT 18 has a different definition, and that's an intercept doesn't take place until it's actually listened to, until somebody puts on some earphones or actually reads some text on a screen. So you can pull in all the communications you want.
The acquisition isn't the search. The querying later on is the search. They can then keep it in their database and target after the fact by going back and conducting data mining searches afterward, in other words, to get the information that they couldn't target from the outset.
And there is another real problem. Unfortunately, the software will, once it takes in data, it will build profiles on everybody in that data. The purpose is to be able to monitor what people are doing. You build social networks for everybody. That then turns into the graph, and then you index all that data to that graph, which means you can pull out a community that gives you an outline of the life of everybody in the community. And if you carry it over time from 2001 up, you have that 10 years worth of their life that you could lay out in a timeline. That involves anybody in the country. Even senators and House of Representatives, all of them. The dangers here are that we fall into something like a totalitarian state like East Germany. Well, they came in guns drawn, in my house. They didn't do that to the others, but they did to me. I guess, I don't know, they thought I was probably the most dangerous of all, so I don't know. I don't know what was in their minds, okay? So, but they did that, and they came in and pointed a gun at me when I was getting out of the shower at the time, so they pointed a gun right at my old head, said, hey. So, I wasn't too upset. I just said, yeah, suppose I could get dressed here. They weren't intimidating me anyway, so. Tell me something that will implicate somebody in a crime. That's what they asked me. So I told them what the crime was that I knew about, and that was that George Bush, Dick Cheney, Tenet, and Hayden conspired to subvert the Constitution, the constitutional process, and any number of laws, and here's how they did it, and I explained Stellar Wind on my back porch to all the FBI agents who weren't cleared. So they had a problem. I created a problem for them because they had a bunch of people now who weren't cleared for a very highly classified, only because it was domestic spying, by the way, was the reason it was highly classified. They wanted to highly classify the extreme impeachable crimes that they were committing.
One of the results of this program is that it operated under presidential authorization and required periodic reauthorization approximately every 45 days. Each renewal effectively reaffirmed the government's commitment to extraordinary collection authorities. Supporters argued that the measures were necessary, that the country had experienced the deadliest terror attack in its history, and that the threat environment remained uncertain, and that additional attacks seemed possible. Critics, however, raised a different concern, that emergency authorities have a tendency to expand, that temporary measures often become permanent, and secrecy can make meaningful oversight difficult. These concerns would eventually erupt into one of the most dramatic constitutional confrontations in the post-9/11 era. For several years, the president's surveillance program continued largely outside public view. But inside the Department of Justice, concerns began growing. Some officials responsible for reviewing the program's legality became increasingly uncomfortable with aspects of the government's legal reasoning. Early legal justifications relied heavily on arguments developed by attorneys within the Office of Legal Counsel. Those opinions generally emphasized expansive presidential authority during wartime and argued that the commander-in-chief possessed broad powers to conduct intelligence operations against foreign threats. Initially, these arguments satisfied senior officials. Over time, however, deeper reviews raised questions. One of the most important figures in that reassessment was Jack Goldsmith. After assuming leadership of the Office of Legal Counsel, Goldsmith began re-examining classified legal opinions that had previously authorized numerous post-9/11 programs, and what he found troubled him. Other officials shared similar concerns. For instance, Deputy Attorney General James Comey, Attorney Patrick Philbin, and FBI Director Robert Mueller. Together, they increasingly questioned whether portions of the surveillance program could survive rigorous legal scrutiny. And that conflict reached its peak in March 2004 when Attorney General John Ashcroft was hospitalized with a severe illness and recovering from surgery. Because Ashcroft was incapacitated, James Comey was serving as acting Attorney General. At the same time, a scheduled reauthorization of the surveillance program approached. Senior White House officials, including Roberto Gonzalez and Andrew Card, traveled to Ashcroft's hospital room seeking approval. What followed became one of the most famous episodes in modern Justice Department history. Comey learned of the planned visit and rushed to the hospital. Several Justice Department officials converged on the scene. Ashcroft, weak and recovering, remained in his hospital bed. Yet, despite his condition, he refused to overrule the Department of Justice's concerns. According to later testimony, Ashcroft stated that Comey was the acting Attorney General and possessed the authority to make the decision. The confrontation was dramatic, but the significance extended far beyond one hospital room. The dispute represented a clash between two competing visions of government authority. One emphasized operational necessity, and the other emphasized legal limits. The disagreement became so severe that multiple senior officials reportedly prepared resignation letters. The possibility of mass resignations from senior national security leadership created a crisis inside the administration. Eventually, modifications were made. Some components of the surveillance program were altered. Others continued under revised legal frameworks, but the confrontation demonstrated something more important. The most significant debates over surveillance were not always occurring in public, that many occurred inside the government itself. Among those debates were officials who generally agreed on the need to prevent terrorism, but disagreed sharply on how far surveillance authority should extend. And although the immediate crisis subsided, the underlying question remained unresolved. If emergency authorities were legally vulnerable, how could the government preserve the capabilities it considered necessary? And the answer would reshape American surveillance policy for years to come. One of the most common patterns in government history is the transition from temporary emergency measures to permanent institutions. The surveillance programs created after September 11th followed a similar trajectory. The constitutional crisis surrounding portions of the president's surveillance program demonstrated that relying indefinitely on extraordinary presidential authorizations created risks. Programs operating in legal gray areas remained vulnerable to challenge. A more durable solution required legislation. Gradually, activities that had once existed under emergency authorities began migrating into statutory frameworks. The Protect America Act represented one step in that process. Later, the FISA Amendment Acts expanded and formalized authorities associated with foreign intelligence collection. Most importantly, these challenges established what became known as Section 702, which sought to provide a legal mechanism for collecting communications involving foreign intelligence targets located outside the United States. Supporters argued the framework modernized intelligence collection for the Internet age. Critics argued, however, that it institutionalized surveillance powers that had originated during an emergency. Regardless of perspective, one reality is difficult to ignore. The architecture did not disappear, it evolved. Authorities became codified, oversight mechanisms were expanded. The Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court assumed a more prominent role. Congress received additional briefings and procedures became more formalized, yet the underlying objective remained remarkably consistent with the goals that emerged immediately after September 11th, which was to reduce uncertainty, increase visibility, close intelligence gaps, and prevent surprise. In many ways, the story of post-9/11 surveillance is not a story of individual programs, it's a story of continuity. The names changed, the legal authorities changed, the public justifications also changed, but the strategic objective remained the same. And in the next phase of that evolution, a new program would emerge that embodied many of those same goals while operating on an entirely different scale. Its name was PRISM. STELLARWIND represented the emergency phase of post-September 11th surveillance. PRISM represented the institutional phase. By the time PRISM emerged, the intelligence community had spent years adapting to a world increasingly defined by digital communications. The internet had transformed how people exchanged information. Email replaced letters, for instance, messaging platforms supplemented phone calls, cloud storage began replacing local files. Social media connected billions of people across borders, and from the perspective of intelligence agencies, communications were increasingly moving into private infrastructure owned by technology companies. Traditional surveillance models struggled to keep pace. Intelligence organizations that once focused heavily on telephone networks now faced a world where enormous quantities of information flowed through internet platforms. The challenge was no longer simply intercepting communications. It was identifying relevant communications inside a rapidly expanding digital environment. PRISM emerged from that reality. Authorized under Section 702 of the FISA Amendments Act, PRISM allowed the government to acquire communications associated with specific foreign intelligence targets located outside the United States. The public discussion surrounding PRISM often became confused because many people imagined a system that continuously monitored everyone using major technology platforms, and that was not how the program was described by the government. Instead, PRISM functioned through selectors. A selector could be an email address, account identifier, or another targeting mechanism associated with an approved foreign intelligence target. Once authorized through established procedures, the government could compel technology companies to provide communications associated with those selectors. The process typically involved the FBI's Data Intercept Technology Unit, which served as an intermediary between intelligence agencies and private companies. And over time, major technology firms reportedly became part of the program's operational framework, such as Microsoft and Yahoo, Google, Facebook, Apple, Skype, and YouTube. And that list would become one of the most controversial aspects of the PRISM disclosures. Many citizens reacted strongly because the program illustrated something that had gradually become true throughout the digital age, that communications infrastructure was no longer owned primarily by telecommunications providers. It increasingly resided inside private technology companies. The intelligence community adapted accordingly. Supporters of the program argued that PRISM became one of the most valuable foreign intelligence tools available to the government, and the reason was straightforward. The modern internet contained an enormous amount of information relevant to intelligence investigations. It contained communications and photographs, stored files, video calls, social connections, travel plans, and contacts. All of those things were operational coordination, and information that once would have required separate collection efforts could now exist within a single account. Critics, however, focused on different concerns, such as scale and secrecy and oversight, and the potential for incidental collection involving Americans communicating with foreign targets. These concerns often became intertwined with broader public confusion regarding metadata and content, and that distinction matters because metadata generally refers to information about communication, such as who communicated, when, for how long, and from where. Content refers to the substance of the communication itself, like the actual email, the message, the voice conversation, and the attachments. Public debate frequently collapsed these categories into a single concept called surveillance, yet the legal frameworks governing them often differed significantly. The controversy surrounding PRISM reflected a larger transformation taking place across society. The intelligence community increasingly relied upon private infrastructure. Technology companies became part of the communications environment, and the boundaries between public authority and private networks became increasingly difficult to separate.
Their argument was that if we published the names, then the companies would be less inclined to cooperate. And I guess we agreed to disagree on that one. The PRISM program is not about metadata, it's about content. It's the photos and videos you send, it's the words of your emails, it's the sounds of your voice on a Skype call, it's all the files you have stored on a cloud drive service. It's content, it's everything.
I'm going to take one question. I don't want the whole day to just be a bleeding press conference, but I'm going to take Jackie Combs' question.
Mr. President, could you please react to the reports of secret government surveillance of phones and internet? And can you also assure Americans that their government, your government, doesn't have some massive secret database of all their personal online information and activities?
Yeah. What the intelligence community is doing is looking at phone numbers and durations of calls. They are not looking at people's names, and they're not looking at content.
My name's Ed Snowden. I'm 29 years old. I work for Booz Allen Hamilton as an infrastructure analyst for NSA in Hawaii. The NSA specifically targets the communications of everyone. It ingests them by default. It collects them in its system, and it filters them, and it analyzes them, and it measures them, and it stores them.
The PRISM revelations reached beyond the collection of phone records.
On its own citizens.
This was about the acquisition of content of tens of thousands of NSA targets.
Did you check your account on Gmail? Secret spying program is entirely different.
Let me show the audience a couple of examples of what you revealed. If you can have a slide up. And Ed, I don't know whether you can see, the slides are here. This is a slide of the PRISM program. And maybe you could tell the audience what that was that was revealed.
The best way to understand PRISM, because there's been a little bit of controversy, is to first talk about what PRISM is. Much of the debate in the US has been about metadata. They've said it's just metadata, it's just metadata, and they're talking about a specific legal authority called Section 215 of the Patriot Act. That allows sort of warrantless wiretapping, mass surveillance of the entire country's sort of phone records, things like that. Who you're talking to, when you're talking to them, where you travel, these are all metadata events. PRISM is about content. It's a program through which the government could compel corporate America. It could sort of deputize corporate America to do its dirty work for the NSA. And even though some of these companies did resist, even though some of them, I believe Yahoo was one of them, challenged them in court, they all lost because it was never tried by an open court. They were only tried by a secret court. And something that we've seen, something about the PRISM program that's very concerning me is There's been a talking point in the U.S. government where they've said 15 federal judges have reviewed these programs and found them to be lawful. But what they don't tell you is those are secret judges in a secret court based on secret interpretations of law that's considered 34,000 warrant requests over 33 years, and in 33 years only rejected 11 government requests. These aren't the people that we want deciding what the role of corporate America in a free and open internet should be.
The architecture of surveillance evolved because the architecture of communication evolved first. That reality remained largely hidden from public view until 2013. Then everything changed when, in June of that year, former NSA contractor Edward Snowden provided classified documents to journalists. The disclosures would become one of the most consequential intelligence leaks in modern history. Because for years, many surveillance programs had operated largely outside of public discussion, and now internal documents appeared in newspapers around the world such as The Guardian, The Washington Post, and eventually dozens of additional outlets. Suddenly, names that had previously existed only inside classified environments entered public vocabulary, such as PRISM, Section 702, Boundless Informant, X-Keyscore, STELLARWInd, metadata collection, and the disclosures triggered an immediate debate that continues today. Government officials defended the programs, but their argument was generally consistent that activities were legal, they were subject to oversight, they operated under congressional authorization, and they played a critical role in protecting national security. However, critics viewed the situation differently. They argued that meaningful democratic oversight becomes difficult when the public remains unaware of the programs being debated. They questioned whether the scale of collection exceeded what citizens understood, and they raised concerns regarding secrecy itself. One of the most controversial disclosures involved a system called X-Keyscore. Public reporting described it as a powerful analytical capability allowing intelligence systems to search and examine collected data. And the significance was not merely technical, it represented a shift in how people thought about surveillance. Because collection's one thing and search is another, storage is one thing, access is also another, and many citizens who had previously focused on whether information was collected began asking a different question, such as who can query that information, also under what authority, with what safeguards, and how can the public verify those safeguards actually function? The debate increasingly became one of trust in institutions, in oversight mechanisms, in procedures that operated largely outside public visibility. Disclosures also triggered international consequences. Governments around the world reacted strongly, particularly when documents suggested intelligence collection extended beyond terrorism investigations. European leaders demanded explanations. Brazil criticized American surveillance practices. France raised diplomatic concerns. And the European Union launched inquiries, and perhaps the most famous controversy involved reports that communications associated with German Chancellor Angela Merkel had been monitored. Whether viewed as routine intelligence activity or diplomatic overreach, the revelation generated significant tension between allies. This incident also highlighted a reality long understood within intelligence circles that governments frequently collect intelligence against friends as well as adversaries. And the public often finds this surprising. Intelligence professionals generally do not, yet the Snowden disclosures expanded public awareness of these realities dramatically. Because for the first time, millions of people began examining the infrastructure surrounding modern communications, such as data centers and fiber optics networks, international routing, cloud storage, government authorities, corporate compliance, and the invisible systems operating beneath everyday digital life. And the debate was no longer confined to intelligence officials. It had become a societal question. At this point, it becomes reasonable to ask whether the President's surveillance program and PRISM were truly separate programs or merely different phases of the same story. And the answer is both simple and complicated, because operationally they were different. Legally, they operated under different authorities. Technically, they evolved within different environments, but historically, they are clearly connected. The connection is not necessarily found in specific technologies. The connection exists in the problem each program attempted to solve, which was uncertainty. After September 11th, intelligence agencies concluded that dangerous information existed inside communications networks, but it remained invisible to investigators. And the response was greater collection, greater analysis, and greater integration. STELLARWIND represented an emergency effort to close perceived intelligence gaps. The Protect America Act and FISA Amendments Act provided more durable legal foundations. Section 702 institutionalized collection authorities. PRISM expanded access to information stored within modern communications platforms. Different programs, different names, but the same strategic objective, which was to reduce surprise, increase visibility, and close the seam. This pattern should feel familiar because it appears repeatedly throughout communications history. Every major communication system creates new blind spots. Radio created new intelligence challenges, telephones created new intelligence challenges, and the internet also created new intelligence challenges, and each time, governments sought methods to restore visibility. The debate has never been purely technological. It's always been philosophical. How much uncertainty can a society tolerate, for instance, and how much visibility should a government possess? Where should limits exist, and who decides? The answers change across generations, and the questions remain remarkably consistent. Throughout this series, we've repeatedly returned to a central observation. Communication is infrastructure. It is the connective tissue linking individuals, institutions, governments, and societies, and wherever communication exists, intelligence collection eventually follows. The story of STELLARWIND, the President Surveillance Program, Section 702, PRISM, and the Snowden disclosures is ultimately not a story about software. It's not a story about servers, and it's not even primarily a story about surveillance. It's a story about competing fears. One which emerged from September 11th. The fear that critical information might exist somewhere inside a communications network while remaining invisible to investigators. The fear that another attack might occur because agencies lack sufficient visibility. And another fear emerged from the surveillance systems themselves. The fear that governments granted extraordinary access to information may gradually expand those authorities beyond their original purpose. The fear that secrecy can outpace accountability. And all of those concerns are real and continue to shape public debate, and many of them have never been permanently resolved because the technology will continue changing. New platforms will emerge. Communication systems will continue to evolve. Yet the underlying tension will remain that governments will continue seeking greater visibility, and citizens will continue demanding limits. And somewhere between those competing pressures sits the same seam that appeared at the beginning of this episode, the boundary between security and liberty, between visibility and privacy, and the boundary between what governments can know and what they should know. The question was never whether technology would make surveillance possible. The question was how much certainty a free society is willing to purchase and what it is willing to surrender in exchange. That's all I have for this episode. Thank you for listening. And if you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe, rate, or write a review.
There is a signal broadcast every second of every day through our television sets.
Mark my words, AI is far more dangerous than nukes.
Science and technology are propelling us forward at accelerating rates.
Engines throttling up, 3 engines now at 104%.